Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We bring you greetings on behalf of our bishop and all of us in the California Nevada Annual Conference. Thank you for joining us for our Wednesday webinar. Please join us by introducing yourself in the chat window and let us know who you are and where you're from. Also, during our session, if you have any questions, you can put the questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. There's a little question Q&A button, or you can put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat, putting in websites and different things there. But if you have questions, you can put it there also. I want you to know that all webinars are recorded and they're posted on the California Nevada Conference website, along with the upcoming schedule of presenters and topics. Normally, the recording will have it done by Friday. So if you check on the website on Friday under events in the calendar, you'll be able to see the recordings. During the month of March, during this Lenten season, we are focusing our webinars on becoming more like Christ in our journey. Matthew 25:37 through 40 asks, "When did we see you?" Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison, or go to visit you?" Then the king will reply, "Truly, I tell you, whenever you did, whatever you did for one of the least of these, my sisters and my brothers, you did it for me." Well, we have an exciting webinar as normal for you, focusing on how we see others as we are compelled by Christ and compelled by love. Please join me in welcoming Sonya, Ed, Bennett, the director of our Disaster Response Ministry, and she will introduce our guests. Good afternoon, Sonya.
Hey, Reggie, great to be here. There is a lot that's happening around the conference right now. And just in spite of and because of the pandemic, we are continuing to just move forward and demonstrate God's love through our actions and through our programs and our interactions. And so there's a couple people with us today that I'm going to tell you about in a minute. But I want to let you know that there is a lot happening. A lot will be coming out of the disaster response office over these next month, and then also out of the VIM, or volunteers in missions office. We work really closely together, and it's hard to know where disaster response stops and VIM starts. And for those of you that have volunteered, you understand. Anyway, one of the first things that we want to talk about is something coming up really quickly. Tomorrow, be sure to check out the Instant Connection. There will be an article there that tells about a fire bucket campaign. When we responded this last fall to basically Northern California on fire, we went to the CZU fire in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and then also to Oroville and the Butte County to help those from Berry Creek and from those areas. And so what we determined we needed to give them, some needed the standard Core cleaning buckets, but others really had nothing to clean because their homes were destroyed. And so we put out a call for fire buckets, and people responded. Oh my gosh, the churches really responded. We ended up with about 130 to 50 buckets. And so we were excited to have those. And you know what? A lot of them went out immediately. So we kept the call out and decided that we want to prepare, because we need to talk about preparedness. We need to be prepared. And so our disaster response team said, let's do a fire bucket campaign and really encourage the churches to get involved in making buckets that are going to stay here. And so we have identified a couple of churches within our conference that have just graciously agreed to store buckets. And we have Pinole, and we have Stockton, and we're working on a north and an east as well. We'll have more information coming about that. But what we want to do is to have about a minimum of 300, and we figure we can hold up to 500 fire buckets. Now, each bucket costs about $100 to $110. So multiple people can bring things in. They include, let me see if I can find my list. They include the PPE that is so important, and the masks and the coveralls, and a 5-gallon bucket, but also work gloves and different, some tools in order for people to be able to sift through the ashes of their destroyed homes. So often they lose everything. And we want to be able to provide them the opportunity for some closures, and for some closure, and also to find any valuables. We have found rings and coin collections, and even some figurines that have meant a lot to people. And so those are our early response team members that help the families do this, but they need the fire buckets. So we're going to be sending out some information tomorrow, and it has been put together by Will Ebler, and he is our AmeriCorps member, and is has put together the fire bucket campaign. So you will see his name a lot over the next few months. And so watch for that. I looked for my my shopping list, and I can't figure out how to share my screen. If I did, oh wait, there it is. You would think I was a novice. Okay, hold on. So here is the bucket list with everything else. Nope, that's not it. So anyway, I'm going to post it. I'm going to put it in the chat later, and or maybe Will, if you could, Will, put it in the chat. Put in the bucket list and the shopping list, because we want to let you know where to go and what to do. So the second thing is, see how easy it is for me to ask Will to do something, and he has it. You'll see it shortly in the chat. Will is a phenomenal AmeriCorps member, and this is a resource that we have been blessed with through a community partnership, actually out of Sonoma County. But Will is local, and he is tasked with helping us build out of the Disaster Response Office and VIM. He is tasked with helping us build the volunteer infrastructure and helping to do those best practices and implement those best practices for volunteers. So one of the things that you'll be seeing over the next couple of weeks, or actually next month, over the next month or so, is a volunteer survey. Anyone within your church that's volunteered in the last 2 years and that we have a record of, we are going to send them a volunteer survey. If you have regular volunteers, we want to encourage you to survey them regularly about their satisfaction with their assignments, about training, and if they feel that they're adequately trained, Do they have enough information? Do they need more days off? Just different questions. Will has his name, and maybe you can put it again so people don't have to search for it. But Will can help you with some of those survey questions. And of course, we also have a fantastic resource in Sherry Sandoval, the coordinator of the Volunteers in Mission. So you can contact either of those. Their information is in the chat, and ask them, what do I do for a survey? That's a best practice in volunteer retention. The second thing that we're going to be doing in April is a volunteer recognition. April is National Volunteer Month. So you might just think about ways that you can recognize your volunteers. So we have amazing volunteers in the disaster response office. And so we're going to be recognizing them, and anybody that has volunteered through the Volunteers in Missions over the last year and through the disaster response office. But we need more volunteers for disaster response. So if you're thinking, you know what, I'd really like to step up and step out, there are ways to do that locally, and there are ways to do that through the conference office. So again, contact us. You can contact me, Will, Sherry, and get on our list for people to call, because we actually now have a list. It's in a database, and we're excited about that. If you have any questions for that, put it in the chat box. Also, want to say, before I get to my final thing, is that our offices, VIM and Disaster Response, are serving under the mission focus area and the committee, the mission focus area that I can't remember the name of, because that happens when you're talking to people you can't even see. So the mission focus area, our committee is the Mission Service Committee, and it's led now by Sune Cho, and she is doing a great job of pulling together the mission service area. So I think you're going to see a lot more over the next 2 years about missions and opportunities to fulfill the call to go into all the world, whether it's your neighbor or Puerto Rico or Ecuador. Now, finally, that brings us to UMCOR. We are so blessed, really, truly, honestly, in our conference to have an excellent resource and an excellent relationship with the United Methodist Committee on Relief. UMCOR is there if a disaster hits. They are there quickly with a solidarity grant, which helps us immediately meet the need of large disasters. Or even if a town, for example, Walker was completely destroyed, but did not fit into the FEMA guidelines for FEMA assistance. And so they need help. UMCOR can potentially be a resource for us if we have people that are able to respond, if we have churches able to respond to Walker. But also they have helped us. We just completed a disaster case management ministry in Mendocino, Sonoma, and Lake counties from the 2017 fires. Now you may be saying it's 2021, but do you know that we're just now coming into to doing the volunteer rebuilds for the Camp Fire? And the Camp Fire was in November 2018, and they are just now ready to begin rebuilding for those homes, for those that were most vulnerable and hit by the Camp Fire. All of this funding that's not from the Conference Disaster Fund, but are through UMCOR grants, consultations with UMCOR, calls to say, what do I do? What do we do? And I'm your liaison for UMCOR if I can help you in any way. Anyway, all of that takes administration. And you know that when you give to UMCOR, it goes directly to direct service. However, UMCOR Sunday is what allows us and allows our conference to benefit from the amazing consultants that they have and training. For example, Charles and I were talking and identified that their church might benefit from some social emotional care training about how to interact with individuals that are coming for assistance or that are dealing with disaster. So I'm going to call UMCOR and ask if they can provide a training. The trainings are covered by UMCOR Sunday. So the people that do the training are covered by UMCOR Sunday. So we just ask you to support UMCOR Sunday, and it is not a specific date, although March 14th is kind of the universal date, but you could do it this Sunday, you could do it on the 21st, you can do it the 28th. Heck, you could even do it in June, because the thing is, it's a certain advance. Information on that will also be tomorrow in the Instant Connection, just a link, and then the following week we'll have an article. And that is about it. Any questions about that before I get to the panelists? I'm already 2 minutes over. That's horrible. Reggie,
we're good.
Any questions?
We're good. No.
We're good. Fabulous. I'm glad I could answer all the questions as I talked and talked and talked. Okay, so I have been fortunate enough to meet the two people that are on helping us today, and the direction of our conversation is about the fact that we are called by Christ. And the UMCOR theme is compelled by Christ. But when we see needs in our community, there is something that compels us as children of God to demonstrate God's love through, whether it be through providing food or shelter or just a cup of cold water. As the scripture that Reggie shared with us, we are compelled by love and compelled by Christ. So the two individuals that we have with us today, Charles White, the pastor at Susanville UMC, and I'm going to ask Charles to tell us just a brief little bit about yourself when you come on. And then we also have a new friend of mine that I'm totally excited about, Kathy Foley from the Truckee United Methodist. And Kathy, I'll ask you to just briefly show a little bit about you. So Charles, why don't you shoot? Just
all right.
Tell us a little bit about you, and I'm not going to ask about your program just yet.
Okay. Thank you, Sonya. Charles White, currently the pastor up at Susanville Methodist. I've been there since November of 2019. It was a mid-season appointment that was a surprise to many of us, but a blessing to all of us. I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, so you might hear a little bit of that in my voice. Went to undergrad down at Georgia Southern in Georgia, Statesboro, Georgia, and then did grad school up in Rochester, New York. Spent the last 25 or so years in the printing and marketing industries. And then as a second career, finally answered the calling to go to seminary and become a pastor, something I've been pushing off for a while, and something that Truckee Methodist had a lot to do with, but we won't get into that.
Okay, well, that's a good segue to Kathy.
Yes.
Can we move to her? Kathy, why don't you tell us just a little bit about you?
Hi there. So, in 2008, I started as the administrator at Church of the Mountains. I've lived in Truckee here since 1993. I moved out here from Michigan after graduating from college. And so in order to live up here in Lake Tahoe, you have to be really creative and do a lot of different things. So I've had quite a few different chapters. I joined Church of the Mountains at a time when I had 3 small children and was a single mom, and have stayed in that space as one of the main pieces of my role in the community. So I got out of corporate world mortgage loans and made my main role the administrator at Church of the Mountains with 2 or 3 other side jobs to figure it all out. Here I am.
We're so excited because both of you have really rich backgrounds. One of the things that I've realized as I'm fairly new to the United Methodist Church is just the incredible individuals and the wealth of knowledge and wisdom that are in the seats of United Methodist churches. So let's get to business. Let's talk about your programs. We're going to start with you, Charles. If you could just tell us about your project that we're going to talk about today, the quick version.
Right. The quick version is that last year, after many conversations to see where our church thought God might be guiding us, long story short, we decided to open a food pantry. And that has become what we call the Hope Food Pantry. And it's been wildly successful, far more than any of us could have anticipated. But it's been a real joy to be involved with it.
Wow, that was the short version. Great. Do you have some logos that you can share with us?
I do. The logo you see on my screen right now, my lovely wife, Ann, designed for us. She's a graphic designer, and I've leaned on her numerous times over the last couple of decades to say, hey, Ann, I've got a new project. We need a logo. Would you put something together for us? It's been incredibly helpful because as we've launched this into the community, we put this logo on everything. We've printed out business cards to hand around town. It's on banners. It's on social media. It's on our website. This is my marketing background kicking in, but we really have wallpapered the town with this thing. So much so that people recognize it. We have it on shirts and t-shirts. And when they see it, they understand. We haven't even been open a year yet. And people are saying, oh, I know you guys. Yeah, y'all are up there and y'all do great stuff. And so it's been a great way of connecting people.
Right. Branding is important. Branding is important. So look at all of those. So your project has all of those people involved?
Exactly. And this has happened over time. Again, we've been working on this. First conversation started in early April of last year. And it's been, word of mouth and relationships. And Sonya, exactly what you talked about a minute ago, there is a wealth of knowledge and resources sitting in our pews, much of it just waiting to be asked, do you know somebody? Or here's the situation. What are your thoughts on it? So as we've taken advantage of our own internal resources and the resources of our community, who knows who? And, Susanville, small town, about 8,500 people, pretty much everybody knows somebody. And as needs have arisen, as opportunities have come up, we just bring it up in conversation. And so I want to give a shout out, not to all these by name, but the logos that you see on the screen behind me really do represent just every facet of our community coming together and saying in some way, shape, or form, yes, we'll be more than happy to support that. It's been incredible.
Right. Thanks. And I think that that's one of the themes that you're going to hear ongoing today is about community involvement. One more thing, Charles, before I get to Kathy, is I asked you to give the short version and it may have been a little too short.
Okay.
But I love it. Short answers are going to be important today. But what compelled you? What did you see in the community? I know you did a lot of research and really had some data actually too, but what compelled you?
So again, I started in November. This is just before COVID kicked in, and I'm trying to get to know people in the congregation. So making conversation with them and asking them, what are the needs of our community and what are the opportunities? What has our church been involved with in the past? And food pantry kept coming up in multiple conversations as something we'd done in the past and something that people were potentially excited about. And there was one couple in particular, Mark and Mandy Speicher. I want to give them credit where tremendous credit is due. They started doing research on their own, which is always nice, and came back to me, multiple phone calls a day of stats they had discovered. Like 20% of Susansville's population lives below the federal poverty level. 1,100 students in Susanville go to bed hungry at night because they have food insecurity. It was 50%, nearly 50% of the college students in northeastern California are food insecure, meaning they don't know where their next meal potentially is coming from. And Susanville's home of Lassen Community College, so that hits home. So it was stats like that that said there's a need here. And so you've got the numbers matching up with how we felt like the Spirit was moving us.
All right, very nice. And for our listeners and participants, if you feel led and compelled to help those that are hungry and dealing with food insecurity, and you think, yeah, and don't have the resources or whatever it might be to start a food pantry, look for some other ways. How can you support the local food bank? How can you help those that put the boxes together? Just a thought. And consider it a volunteer and mission program. All right, Kathy, tell us about your exciting program.
So our program began back in 2015, and it was driven by a much larger group. So as Church of the Mountains, sitting in the office doing the administrator position, I also did outreach with a group called United for Action. And that's a community coalition of nonprofits and faith-based organizations that would meet monthly to really share the different programs that we each had, to learn about needs in the community, and really fill in the blanks in the social services that weren't being met to care for people's basic needs, you know, food, clothing, and shelter. And I've lived in Truckee a long time, and sitting at that church, it's in the middle of downtown Truckee, and there's a big cross on the top. And so it's sort of a big calling card for anybody who gets off the train or whose car breaks down or is in need. And so I met so many people that would come in who would have a need. Sometimes I could fill it with a gas card or something. But often, you know, they were homeless, and the only option in Truckee was to offer them a bus ticket out of town. And sometimes that didn't happen that day because buses are far and few between, and it might be snowy, way snowier than that background I'm showing you right now in my back of my picture here. And, you know, there was no option for people. So in 2014, when United for Action started to discuss the need for an emergency warming shelter, I joined that committee, and there was a group of people that did research, and we were able to find the location as I approached my church to ask for that space. And that's where the Emergency Warming Center began. And that was a space that opened on super brutal weather triggers for 15 degrees or less, foot or more of snow, or other severe weather conditions, really based around alleviating death. Those of us that had lived here a long time saw our local chronically homeless neighbors, and we knew people who had passed away from not having a place to be. So that was the main motivation all those years ago to start it.
And that's a very real problem. I mean, in Sacramento, there's the same issue, right? I mean, it's caused quite a stir among the advocates, and hopefully the people that were not aware, right, that this is a very real issue. And so you were compelled to do something about it. Now, Kathy, how did the church respond when you took this to the council? And, you know, what was their initial response? And did you end up having a champion, or how did you maneuver that? Did it take a long time?
You know, the church was pretty easy. We had to go through the basic channels of, you know, my pastor was on board right at the front, so that was always a helpful piece. But as we presented it to the church community, church council, they were on board. But then we took the next step of actually inviting everybody into all the members together to have some discussions and just answer questions, because we were going to be using the lower level of the church, and it was going to be a priority over other groups that might be happening there. If the warming center needed to open, those other groups would need to meet upstairs or find another option, because that was the number one priority, or that was the goal. And so, you know, there were basic questions about, you know, what's going to happen if something's damaged, what's going to happen if someone comes in and under the influence, and basic questions. But at the end of the day, after everybody got to share their voice, everybody agreed that saving lives was way more important than if their Bible study could meet in the downstairs, or if we ruined the couch. And so once those questions were answered, they were on board. The town of Truckee was a much more difficult hurdle because in Truckee, we're not able to use our church for shelter. You have to actually get a permit to do it. So that took a little more work, but the church was pretty quick to see Christ.
Right.
Compelled to fill that hole.
Good. Excellent. Thank you. And I know that, so the shelter is not necessarily, is a liability held by the church, or is it held through your community partner?
No, so when we began in 2015, we opened on Christmas Eve that year, and it was a ministry of the church up until end of December this year. And so it's been a ministry of the church and a liability of the church those first 5 years of running.
Right. Okay. All right. And then Charles, what have you done with the Hope Food Pantry as far as where the response or how to keep it going if you leave or, get transferred or whatever?
No, absolutely. And that was one of my big concerns that I expressed to a lot of people early on is I don't want this to be my project or my baby, because eventually the Methodist system, I'll be transferred, appointed somewhere else. And it would be a true shame if this were to die because I'm not here to babysit it. And it's just not effective leadership if I have to babysit it. So early on, we tried to involve as many people as volunteers as possible. Volunteers from within the church, from outside of the church, business leaders. We've had clients who've offered to volunteer. They say, I can't pay for food, but I'd like to give back in some way. Can I volunteer? And one of the things that we've tried hard to do is whoever it is, say yes. We'll find a way for you to volunteer. There's a little kid, he's about, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old, and he shows up with his mom once a week and he says, what can I do? And so I have him break boxes down, gives him something to jump up and down on. But that's an example of how whoever you are, I'll find a way to work you in. Because of that, we have people from across the community volunteering. Yay. And seeing it firsthand. And, we can do webinars every single day of the year. I can tell you all about it. But if you come down and you volunteer, and this is true of any project, and you see it for yourself, you experience it for yourself, it's a whole different level of understanding that you'll walk away with. And because of that, people will come and volunteer just one time and say, because of my job, I can't volunteer on a regular basis, but I'll do a food drive at my office. I'll talk to my neighbors. I'll talk it up. I'll support you guys however I can, which has been tremendous.
Okay, great. So you gave me a number earlier today when we were talking about, since you started in April of last year, do you remember how many volunteer hours? And this is every time a volunteer shows up, they're counted as one. Right? So they're Correct. Counted as one on Monday, they're counted as one on Tuesday. Each day they're counted anew. So you Correct. Had how many volunteer hours?
So the second half of 2020, we had 3,672 volunteer hours. And in the first 2 months of this year, we've been quite busy, 2,184 volunteer hours.
So I want to encourage all of you that have volunteers. Every volunteer hour equates to $31.51 in in-kind donation. $31.51. That's the current rate for the state of California. And so that, if you ever end up applying for grants or are working on a disaster, if you're responding to a disaster, and no matter what it is in the church, if you're responding to a disaster, it's important to communicate with your county how many volunteer hours your church gave. Because, and if you don't know who to send that to, you can send it to me and I'll get it to the right people. But because when a disaster strikes in your county, the county has to demonstrate that they have done their due diligence, they're paying, that they have exhausted their resources, and each hour equates to $1. And the more dollars that they can demonstrate that they've shown, then the more reimbursement they get from FEMA. So it's really, really critical to let them know, don't cheat the numbers, but let them know and have a system for recording those. If you don't have a system for recording volunteer hours, which I'm sure you all do, certainly you can contact me or Will or Sherry. And then Kathy, how did you staff your project?
So, I don't know if I missed the question on liability, but the church took it on as a ministry. But as far as the way that it ran was through huge support for the entire community. So there were 15 or so of us that worked on figuring out the guidelines, really that base of how we were going to run this space. And so the first year we learned on the job. We'd done research from 2 or 3 other small warming centers and resort towns, but we put out the word to everybody and anybody through all the different churches, through the local community. And people came to basic trainings from the Red Cross, just basic information, how to communicate with people in crisis. And then we just showed up and started doing the work. And the next year, the guidelines looked different because we upgraded them with every little lesson that we learned and the things that were applicable to our particular situation. But it's been a wide support from the community as far as volunteer hours and funding to make it happen.
Nice. And so each person that comes into your building is exposed to the fact that you're a church, and you just can't help but have stuff around. Now, we are called in our response when we're doing community response with entities that are maybe funded through government funds or that are inclusive and ecumenical, right? That we have to be very careful about saying, hey, come to our church. But they can ask. So tell me tell us, how many have you seen interested in your church, and have you seen any crossover? Kathy?
So we've definitely, when we've been open on a Saturday night and Sunday morning rolled along, we definitely have guests that spent the night with us that join us for church in the morning. They join us to sing, and they join in the closing circle, and some of them even have the voice to share that their life was saved, potentially physically saved by being able to be there, and the gratitude that they have for that space being used. Additionally, we have lots of unchurched people that participate in really living out the gospel with us. Right. Don't need words to do that together. Right. And we have had folks that have come to church, and they look at church a little bit differently than the reasons why they separated themselves from the church over the years. And so, it's most heartwarming for me when our guests get that opportunity. To feel the love.
Yeah, I think these are both great examples of, as we used to say in the Salvation Army, Christianity with its sleeves rolled up. Right. And so, Charles, how about you? Have you seen any crossover or interest from people?
Oh, absolutely. And exactly what Kathy was saying, similar situation. Like I said, we only opened up end of May last year. So, we're open the second half of 2020, and you know the deal. So many people have been burned by churches over the years. They're reluctant to come onto church property. They wonder if they're going to be rejected again, or if we're going to proselytize. And the fact that we don't, and that we always welcome people, and we're known as a safe space, a welcoming space. After about 4 to 6 months, people start trusting us and getting to know us as people. And we really do call a lot of our clients friends.
Right.
So since November, no, I'll go back to September. We had clients asking us, when are you going to be open? What are your hours? I haven't been involved in a church for a long time. Are you Christian? What do you guys believe? And to me, I can answer any question somebody asks me. Like, there's no federal law preventing that. Okay. So if somebody asks me, I'll say, well, here's the short answer. And if you want to know more, ask me another question. but it really has helped us establish a lot of new connections with people who prior to this had no connection with our church. And honest to goodness, I think if we were to open our doors tomorrow, we would have probably a dozen, easily 8 to 12 new people walk in the door.
That's fantastic. And we know too that like Kathy has found and you have found, people are not as open when they're hungry and when they're cold, right? They're not as open to having a conversation. And so their basic needs need to be met. So I just want to encourage everybody listening again to just, if you are feeling led, pray about it. Talk to some people at church about it and what you can do to meet some of the basic needs in the community. Compelled by love. And so we only have a few minutes left. Can you believe it? There are so many questions, and so many questions I have. I can imagine some others might have some. But so if we don't get to your question now, then hang on after the webinar officially ends, and we'll have what Reggie calls the narthex moment, and we can just chat and you can ask questions verbally. So moving on though, we are disaster response, right? Our office is disaster response. So I'd like to know, Charles, how have you been able to, or how have you connected your existing project to a disaster in your community?
Oh, great. So like I said, so we opened up, first day was end of May. And then this summer, we had one major wildfire in June and the other major wildfire, I believe, was in July. Two very separate events, both very close to Susanville, scary close. Like we were evacuating people in town, and town's not that big. So yeah, it was traumatic for a lot of people. In that process, the fire got so big and so close that the county opened up an evacuation center. Interestingly enough, Susanville is a very Facebook-oriented town. And so the word got out on Facebook that the evacuation center needed water, beverages, and single-serve edible items. And so what the Mark, who was managing the pantry at the time, called me up and said, "I'll meet you at the church, let's go." And okay, so ran up there, loaded up his truck with water and whatever single serve edibles were on the shelf, took them to the evacuation center, said, "Here you go. We heard you needed this." They're like, "Wow," because we showed up with a F-150 full of stuff. And then we said, "What else do you need?" And they said, "Well, IGA grocery store said that they had water, but we can't get over there and they can't deliver it. No problem. We'll go get it for you." So that's what we did. And we come back. "Okay, what else do you need?" Like, "We don't have breakfast for tomorrow." "No problem. Go to the grocery store, buy breakfast items, come back. What else do you need?" And it was that really started our relationship with the county and the city, where they realized we're not here to ask for anything other than what do you need next.
Right. That's such a great lesson, that it really, that we can stand up immediately. We don't have to open as a shelter. We, although those are needed, we don't necessarily need to, it doesn't have to be this huge thing, but we can all serve in disasters. One thing I want to encourage you is that Charles was able to hear the communication from the county. And it's really important that you communicate with the county, or if you have any questions about whether or not you should respond, you can contact me. My cell phone number is in there. I'm sure Reggie can put it up again. You can contact me directly because I have those connections if you don't. One of the largest problems that we have in disaster response is people getting in their car with used clothing, with used, with food from their cupboard, and just going to the evacuation center. That honestly becomes a disaster within the disaster. And then when the disaster is over, we have to, the county then has to do something with this football field worth of donations. and that costs money and takes money away from recovery. So I want to encourage you, as you feel compelled to do something, but make sure that you talk to somebody first, not somebody from the community, but somebody from the county, the city, or from my office, okay, or our office. Okay, Kathy, what about you? You've got kind of a different disaster.
Yeah, so our big disaster that we jumped into was when COVID hit last year. And I was looking at the calendar, and last year, March 3rd, which is 1 year ago today, we rose to the occasion to start offering day services, because in our community, all of the other services in different churches and community organizations were shut down by COVID. And in our church, we were sort of wrapping up our warming center season. And all of a sudden, our neighbors had no place to shelter in place at all. And so we started opening during the day, 4 days a week, and offering showers and connection to services and health checks and masks and hand sanitizer and really education for those neighbors. Within a month period of time, we outgrew the lower level of the church. The number of people that were affected by COVID, that were now working and living in their cars and didn't have access to the other shower spots, we ended up needing to find a different space. So we were able to relocate to the lower level of our Veterans Memorial Building, which is a Rec and Park District building, and continue the services through the year. And so we've been open all year long. We went month to month for a while, but now we really outgrew the structure of the church. So as of January, our program partnered with a much larger organization called AMI Housing, which is a nonprofit in California that helps mentally ill individuals with housing opportunities. And we partnered with them, and they have purchased a building for supportive housing over in the Placer County side of our region. And so our structure has changed huge since then. And so it's not a ministry of the church anymore. I have a full-time job and a couple staff members, and we've got case management, and we're looking at housing, and it's totally grown from that small little warming center to really a life-giving entity on its own. The other thing that happened in March is that all of a sudden our volunteers couldn't really volunteer, which also prompted the need for staffed positions. And so that's the role we stepped into, and that's the role that we're continuing to fill for the foreseeable future, as COVID is going to continue to be hard for people, and more people will be homeless and lose their jobs and things along the way. So that's what it's now outgrown the church space. The church will need to find their next little mission other than supporting me and the warming center, day center. So it's North Tahoe Truckee Homeless Services now. And that's what we rose up to do.
Right. Good stuff. Good stuff. I love the idea of a warming center. And I know that a lot of our churches actually provide a similar service. Sometimes they move from churches to churches throughout the week. If you're interested in that, certainly contact your city, because I imagine your city is looking for partners to help with that. And one of the themes that I'm hearing, and I've got to wrap it up, but one of the themes that I'm hearing is community relationships. And that it's really, as most of you listening, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I want to encourage it again, that if you're considering what can we do, there are people out there that are experts. You do not need to be the expert, but rely on your community partners. If you get a feeling on the back of your neck and the hair raises up and you're not comfortable, go with it, right? But if you feel that this compels you, that, oh my gosh, we have a resource, or we could have a resource, then I want to encourage you for that. If you want to know more about warming centers and really playing a critical part in a community of faith collaborative, then certainly talk to Kathy. If you want to know more about how to start up a food pantry, and it was such a leap of faith. Really quickly, Charles, how many people did you have the first day you were open?
Day one, after 2 months of hard work and setting up a whole day, we were open at 3 o'clock until 6 o'clock, so people could, come after their minimum wage jobs. Yeah, I think we had a dozen volunteers that day. We were all set up. 3 o'clock came, nobody. 4 o'clock came, nobody. 5 o'clock came, nobody. 5:45, we're all depressed, irritated, frustrated, and ready to pack up and go home. And a guy walks up and says, "Is this the food pantry?" Yes, it is. And we packed his car with food.
How many regularly? What's the average you see now?
Now, let's see, glad to back over at my stats. We're up. So this year, January and February, we're hovering between 70 and 100 clients each Friday. And that represents, just so you understand, those clients represent another 250 to 300 hungry mouths at home.
Right. Good. Okay. So, and somebody put they need cooling centers. Can you be a cooling center? That's just as important. So we're going to kind of close up my questions and your answers and turn it back over to Reggie. I just want to thank you both for the wealth of information. And I want to encourage any of you that have more questions to call these two lovely people, because they will just tell you more than you need to know. But good stuff. Okay, Reggie.
Yay, thank you. Thank you, Sonya and Kathy and Charles. Kathy, is it okay to put your email in the chat? The Gmail, is that good? Is that the best way to contact you?
That one will work.
Got it. It's going in right now. So I got two questions real briefly. One is about the warming centers, but the other one is about protocols. What protocols do you use in the food pantry for COVID, and how do you protect volunteers? So if you can just give a little bit about that, because people are interested in this, but at the same time, we're in a situation.
No, great question. And every discussion our church has had, I think every discussion of COVID protocols should start with the idea that it is risk management. Anytime we get together, whatever protocols we use, it's risk management. We cannot 100% eliminate the risk. And we've had several volunteers who say, "I'm high risk, I'm just going to stay at home for a few months." That's fine. And you can volunteer from home in certain ways. As far as on site, we're fortunate that we have a social hall. We do all of our food is stored in the social hall and organized in the social hall. All of the volunteers stay inside the social hall. Clients walk up to the doors, and we have a table set up at the door, so you cannot walk through the door. All the volunteers inside are wearing masks. We do our best to stay 6 feet apart. Any clients who walk up, if they're on church property, I make them wear a mask. Well, I'll try to be nice with this. Susanville as a town is not too thrilled with wearing masks. I'll just leave it at that. So you have people who say, "Oh, I can't wear a mask for half a dozen reasons." Okay, that's fine. You just have to stay on the sidewalk. And you know what? At the end of the day, we're trying to help hungry people have food. So the challenge to me is, how can I say yes and keep people safe? So if you refuse to wear a mask, you're going to stay on the sidewalk, and I will bring food to you. Yeah, and I'm wearing a mask at all times. We do our best to stay as safe as possible.
Kathy, any response? How do you, with the work you do, how do you protect people from COVID, and what protections or protocols?
So instantly we jumped into the piece of, like I said, mostly having paid staff, just for the limiting of us interacting with the vulnerable homeless neighbors. And so we all wear masks, stay our 6 feet apart, hand sanitizer all the time, and educated everybody who walked in the door about the same thing. So we were taking temperatures and asking questions and tracking health from day to day, as well as requiring when people are indoors that we're keeping social distance of 6 feet, we're wearing face coverings, we are wiping down surfaces, which is another reason for our move. We moved to a building that's really easy to take care of. We can bleach the floors, bleach the tables, and had a lot more space. So just very cautious. Like Charles said, it's risk management. But once again, those of us that are doing it think the risk with safe protocols in place is much less risk than not providing services.
Wow. Compelled by Christ, compelled by love. Final question that has come up, and I saw it and I think, if you would, someone want to start ministry, what is one of the things that you've learned that you say, don't forget that, or do this? What's one thing that you would advise people if they want to start something, ministry out of their local church?
Kathy, you want to go first on that one?
Oh, sure. You know, I would just say that we always run into challenges. And I ran into moments where I was like, am I doing the right thing? This seems difficult. And oh my gosh, I'm here another night in a row. And are we going the right direction? And I would just have to really stop and ask the Spirit that question. And like Sonya said, you get that little raise on the back of your neck and a tingly feeling, and you're like, yeah, this is the right thing to be doing. I'm going to push on through. I'm going to make another phone call. I'm going to talk to somebody else at the town. I'm going to call in more volunteers. I'm going to ask for help more, and just keep pushing forward. When you know something is the right thing to do, and that it is what Christ would be doing, what Jesus would be doing, hands and feet here on the ground today, then be prepared for the challenges, but don't let them stop you. Just keep opening doors and ask questions, and call Sonya.
Yeah. That is actually one of my favorite things. One of my favorite things is to be a resource. And then I'll call Kathy.
Yeah.
Reggie, to answer your question, if somebody's feeling like God's leading them towards something, you know, there's all sorts of advice I could give you. The two that come to mind are invitation and communication. Invite other people to come alongside you in that ministry. If you're doing it by yourself, that's not healthy for you and the ministry. You know, even Jesus sent people out 2 at a time. If we need to work with each other. So that's what I mean by invitation. And communication is talk it up. You know, if God's leading you somewhere, there's a good chance, I believe, that God's leading other people in the same direction. So talk it up and see who else says, yeah, I've been thinking about that too. And, you know, what a coincidence. Yeah.
Okay.
And you'll also get more people supporting you, even if they don't, you know, hey, I don't want to deal with that issue, but here's $100. Okay. Thank you very much.
And one of the pieces, just really quick, Reggie, one of the things that Charles mentioned was that he pretty much knew the feel of the response. Okay, let me reset it. Pretty much knew what the response was going to be before he got into the council office, you know, and before he presented it to council, because he had talked to most of the people that were going to be involved. Is that accurate, Charles?
Absolutely.
Good. Well, this is good stuff. Thank you. Thank you, Sonya, for your wonderful and excellent work, and Kathy and Charles for your inspiring work in as you are compelled by Christ and compelled by love. We're going to have a narthex moment in a minute, and we'll have some other questions. So hang with us for a moment. Don't forget, next week we have a wonderful webinar entitled The Critical Role of Family and Parents in the Faith Formation of Children. Join us with our Director of Camping and Retreat Ministries and our Young People's Ministries, along with our Children's Task Force. This is an important topic, so join us. And also, I want to let you know that at the end of this month, our Wednesday webinars will stop. We are going to look at other formats to bring the wonderful and exciting workshops and trainings All of us here are committed to make that happen. So you'll see something come up in the Instant Connection probably this week about how we're shifting from our Wednesday webinar format that was started during the pandemic to a different type of format so that we can continue our training and workshops and engaging people in these wonderful discussions. So stay tuned, but join us next week. Don't forget, join us next week for our Wednesday webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Hang around for our digital donuts and virtual coffee, and we'll see you next week.